All right, thanks for tuning in to another edition of the OFN Meeting Room on the Ourlads Football Radio Network. We're going to talk San Francisco 49ers football in just a minute. But first, want to make sure that you order this beautiful guide to the NFL Draft, care of Ourlads. That's right, the Ourlads Guide to the NFL Draft. And you can pick that up by logging on to ourlads.com. Okay, now let's find out about the San Francisco 49ers, see how they've been doing this offseason, as Kyle Madsen, managing editor for the Niners Wire at usatoday.com, joins us again. How you doing, Kyle?
Hey, Greg, I'm hanging in there, man. How are
doing
you?
All right. So tell me, how is everything going out on the West Coast? Because California has actually been so far pretty good.
Yeah, our governor, Gavin Newsom, put us under a statewide shelter in place a week or two ahead of most of the rest of the country. So our curve didn't get as high as I think it probably would have, considering the population here. And people have done a pretty good job following it. I actually work in San Francisco. I work at a radio station, so I'm considered an essential employee. Thankfully, I'm still working, and I used to have to take a train into the city, and my commute was about 2 hours. Now I can drive in less than an hour. So
enjoy it while it lasts.
Yeah, I'm trying, but I'll be happy when,
of course,
yes. we're back to normal.
Well, at least there's something positive you could take out of it. That's what we always have to do, is try to take the positives out of it. And like sports fans, we got to take the positives out of the fact that we get the NFL draft. So, I don't care where the draft is. Honestly, I don't. I could care less that it's not in front of a big show and you don't have all this pomp and circus. I don't care about all that stuff. I just want to hear when the picks are called. And they're going to be called in the same manner that they would have been called anyway. So I'm pretty psyched about that.
Yeah, exactly. I actually think as a viewing experience, it might be a little better for somebody who's trying to kind of glean the info. Yeah. I'm actually looking forward to it. It's going to be different for sure.
And hopefully we won't ever repeat it again. So yeah. Once in a lifetime.
Yeah. Hope for a regular draft.
Yeah, exactly. Sure. Okay. Now the Niners have 2 picks in the first round, but correct me if I'm wrong, no second, third, or fourth round picks.
Yeah, that's correct. They pick at 13-31, and then they don't pick again until 156. So that's something that I think is going to get addressed.
So that and because they do have the 31st pick, and still 13th, you never know, but I would guess that the Niners would trade down on one of those 2 picks to try to get those picks back in the rounds 2 to 4.
13, they're not going to trade back, but I really think that they do pick at 13, and I absolutely think they're going to move back at 31. I thought that before the DeForest Buckner trade, and I think it even more so now, because if they're gonna acquire any additional draft capital, it's going to come from a trade back.
All right, talk about the Buckner trade. Did that take the fans off guard? Were they extremely disappointed, or did they understand, at least some of them?
Yeah, I think it was definitely surprising, because Buckner the last 2 years has just kind of been the guy. Like, he's been so dominant in the middle, and even his numbers declined in 2019. Like, he was still such an effective player. And Joe Staley, who loves Frank Gore, lauds Frank Gore, compared DeForest Buckner to Frank Gore, and it just looked like, oh, this is the next franchise guy who's going to be in San Francisco for the next 10 to 15 years. And then he gets traded. Just kind of unceremoniously. There weren't a bunch of rumors. There was no discussion of it beforehand. It was just right as the league's legal tampering window opened, they traded him. And I think now that people have gotten a chance to take a step back and realize that the 49ers were under such a cap crunch that moving Buckner allowed them to retain Jimmy Ward and sign Eric Armstead to a long-term deal. And it frees up the cap room to extend George Kittle on a long-term deal. There's swing and miss on the 13th pick. It'll be deemed this huge failure of a trade, but ultimately the Niners did this as a cost-saving measure and a way to add three or four extra pieces rather than just Buckner
There you go.
and nothing else.
Yeah, that's important. And that definitely means, though, at some point, and again, it's kind of tough, but if we're only talking about the first two picks, we can't guarantee they're going to be able to trade down. Are they going to use one of those two picks on a defensive tackle?
I think so. I think that I've jumbled the Niners list of needs in my head maybe 15 times in the last 2 weeks, just because they need a wide receiver. They need offensive line help. Joe Staley, his future beyond even this year and then beyond this year is up in the air. They need to replace DeForest Buckner. They have no starting cornerbacks under contract beyond 2020, so they have to start looking at that position. But I do think they addressed defensive tackle relatively early. It may not be in the first round, but I do think if they trade back from 31 into kind of the middle of the second round, I think they might look at a defensive tackle there, somebody who can spend time at that defensive tackle spot, because DeForest Buckner was playing so many snaps. Like that's a huge void in their defense that I don't think they're going to be able to replace productivity wise, but they just need somebody to play competently in his position over a pretty large percentage of the defensive snaps. So I think they acquire a defensive tackle relatively early.
Have you been able to gauge any sort of pattern with Lynch as the GM on draft day? Trade up, trade down. When he usually takes players he visits, that sort of thing. Did you have a pattern with them?
Not really, and I think that's kind of how they want it. They traded up to number 31 to take. They traded back from number 2 to number 3. You'll remember in the 2017 draft. That was when they took Solomon Thomas, number 3 overall, and then they traded back up into the first round at number 31 to snag Reuben Foster after he had taken a massive slide into the back end of the first round. But then in 2018, when they drafted Mike McGlinchey had no idea the 49ers were even interested in him. And he was not a name that had really even surfaced. And then like the day before the draft, I think Kuiper and McShay both had McGlinchey going to the Niners in their mock drafts. And it was this really kind of head scratching thing because it was like, wait, who's this guy? And everybody's scrambling to do research on this guy we hadn't even heard of. So, I mean, we'd heard of him, but not with the Niners. And then last year, I think it was just a home run that they were going to take Bosa, number 2 overall. The interesting thing is when you talk about patterns is what Kyle Shanahan wants in a receiver and when his teams typically draft receivers. This wide receiver class is so deep and so top heavy. I don't think it's necessarily a home run that the Niners are gonna take a receiver early.
But when there's the possibility, if some of those quarterbacks sneak into the top 10, you might have 4 offensive tackles taken in the top 10. There is a possibility that those wide receivers, that whether it's Lamb or Judy or Ruggs, that 1 or 2 of them could be available for San Francisco's first pick. Maybe all 3 of them. It's quite possible. Who knows? That'll be awfully tempting.
Yeah, I think so. And that's where I wonder, like, is Kyle Shanahan okay with the fact that CeeDee Lamb, A, played in the Big 12, and B, didn't do a ton of the stuff that he's going to be asked to do in the 49ers offense? Like, when Shanahan is watching him, does he see a player who can do all the things that a player like Emmanuel Sanders did for them last year in their offense? Is Henry Ruggs a player that he thinks he can help scheme open as he learns how to beat press coverage? Can Jerry Jeudy, is he going to develop the toughness to kind of play over the middle, which is sort of the big knock on him, really the only knock on him, is can he play and be effective over the middle of the field? That's where I wish I could get inside Kyle Shanahan's head to see exactly how he is evaluating these receivers. But assuming the 49ers hold them in as high regard as everybody else does, I think they'll sprint to the podium if one of those 3 guys is available.
Okay. Talk about one of the apparent holes at right guard. Person's right now still a free agent. He was the starting right guard last year.
Yeah.
So the team signs Compton. Even though I would guess Compton is more of a backup, fail-safe kind of deal.
Mhm.
So could we see a guard picked in the first round?
I don't think so because Kyle Shanahan hasn't typically valued guard play that highly.
Okay.
They signed Person as kind of a journeyman offensive lineman, and he wound up starting at right guard the last 2 years, and then they cut him this year after he was fine last year. Like he was an adequate right guard, but they cut him to save a little money. You mentioned Tom Compton that they brought in. Ben Garland they re-signed. He played center last year when Weston Richburg went down. He can play guard though. And then Daniel Brunskill, a guy they got from the Alliance of American Football, the
All
AAF.
right.
Yeah, he was at the San Diego Fleet. He came over as a tackle. He was a tight end in college, switched to tackle his final year, signed with the Falcons after Kyle Shanahan left on their practice squad, and then joined the AAF as a tackle. And then the Niners scooped him up, and he wound up playing guard last year for them and doing a nice job when Person was out. So I think he's the front runner to play there right now. And I think because of that, the Niners will avoid drafting an interior lineman. I think they might draft one. I just don't think it'll be very early.
Okay. Let's go to the secondary because there's more than likely some work to be done there. And you talked about contracts and the situation there. Of course, Richard Sherman's the big one. So that's obviously, and not only contracts, but when you're dealing with Richard Sherman, you're dealing with age. So talk, and this has been a unit that the Niners, it seems from the outside perspective, that they have really tried a lot over the years to fix. And whether through injuries or disappointing draft picks, it's just kind of been a mixed bag, and you're not really sure whether or not this has been the one position on the team that they just haven't gotten right over the years, or the one unit that they haven't gotten right over the years. So talk a little bit about some of the players that might be considered their long term, and also whether or not this is definitely a priority, both cornerback and safety.
Yeah, so I think cornerback. It's really gonna be fascinating to see how Richard Sherman does in his age 32 season and in the final year of his contract. What kind of contract is he going to command on the open market next year? And is he a viable starting cornerback after this year? Akella Witherspoon, a third round pick in 2017, had an okay rookie season and then struggled in year two, bounced back last year before he got hurt, and then wound up getting benched in week 17 and then getting benched in the playoff game for Emmanuel Mosley, an undrafted guy who hasn't been able to win a starting job in camp, but has played well when Witherspoon hasn't been available. So it's yet to be seen whether those guys are long-term options, and that's where things get dicey with the Niners drafting a corner, because if they use a premium pick on a cornerback and it turns out Witherspoon and Mosley can be starters long-term, they run into a numbers issue there, and they've essentially perhaps wasted a draft pick, at least in the short term. But I don't think Akella Witherspoon is gonna show that he is this dominant shutdown type of corner.
Yeah.
I think he can play in the NFL. I'm after 3 years, I haven't seen it consistently enough. And same thing with Mosley. He's kind of been up and down here and there. Julio Jones did a number on him when Richard Sherman was out against the Falcons. So Mosley's got quite a bit to prove as well. I think the Niners do draft a corner, maybe not in the first round unless they are in love with a corner that they think is going to be shut down day one, plug him in. He's a 5-time Pro Bowler type of guy.
Okay.
Yeah, then I
so
think
you don't
they
see like
go that.
C.J. Henderson with the 13th pick.
Maybe. I really like Henderson. I think his combination of size and athleticism is excellent, and I think that his his tackling issues I think are a little bit overstated. I think he's fine. So if they love C.J. Henderson and think, like I said, he's going to be a Pro Bowler, All Pro conversation type of guy, then yeah, I think they draft him and they start him this year and then figure out the Mosley and Witherspoon and Sherman situations later, because ultimately, like, you just got to add good players. That's the point of the draft. And if they think the best player available at 13 is a corner, there's nobody on the roster right now, to me, that prevents them from taking a player that they think is going to be a star.
Yeah, because that's where I think it would be a tough decision. Again, wide receiver or corner. Let's say if that's the decision with the 13th pick, because like like you said, and there does seem to be enough depth in the secondary. And Richard Sherman is the
Hmm.
best player, but again, the age and the contract. But as you mentioned, they do need, if they're going to go out and get one, isn't it better to just get one that they believe is going to be that impact starter, that true shutdown future guy? Otherwise, they got a bunch of all those other guys. So if
Yeah.
they don't take him with the 13th pick, or trade down a few spots and take another player, and there's a few others that they could take in the top 20 besides Henderson if they believe in him,
Hmm.
then you kind of wonder maybe they just don't even worry about defensive back at all, because they
Yeah.
have other needs, and they have enough depth at that overall in a unit.
Yeah, and I think like somebody, just to point out a specific player who I've watched over the last few days, and I really like for the Niners defensive scheme, is Damon Arnett from Ohio State. He's not super athletic, but I think he would. The Niners run more zone than anybody in the league defensively, and I think that Arnett is really going to thrive in a zone heavy scheme.
Okay.
So I think that might be the route they go, where they they trade back from 31, or they acquire some mid round picks and a trade back from 13, and they find themselves at some point on day two with Arnett falling into their laps, where they can select him and not feel like they're wasting a premium pick on a guy if he doesn't start this year,
Okay.
and he can then develop, beyond this year. And I think that's kind of what they might wind up doing, is taking a cornerback or two later in the draft that they think can probably develop, but are comfortable not starting right away.
All right. Also, running back. Uh, what's it's just a mystery of what the Niners are going to be able to get, if anything, out of McKinnon now.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the big question mark. I actually wrote about this last night over at Niners Wire, how they basically have six guys who can effectively play running back with a maximum of four roster spots, although I think they'd probably like to keep that to three. McKinnon is the biggest question mark of them all, because in 2 years he tore his ACL before the 2018 season and then re-aggravated that injury last year before the season. So he's been with the Niners 2 years and hadn't played a regular season
Yeah.
game. He's not even been active. He's been on the season-ending IR from the start of the
Yep.
year. So he's a huge question mark. But they signed him in 2018. He was going to be a focal point of their offense. They didn't sign him on a cheap free agent deal to try and get a few carries out of him. He was going to see major snaps. He was going to see a ton of targets in the passing game. He was going to get a lion's share of the carries as a runner. And I think they're going to give him as many chances as possible to be effective in their offense. He was cleared to play at the end of last year. He's now had a full offseason. And then because of COVID-19, he's probably going to have a little extra time away from football to really make sure his knee is healthy. He's posted videos of himself working out, and you got to take those with
Sure.
a grain of salt and your favorite tequila. But he looked good in those. So I think if he's healthy, he's a factor. Just because, like I said, they brought him in because they really like his skill set as a pass catcher and as a runner. So if he's healthy, he'll be in the conversation for sure.
Yeah, it seems like Mostert has been the one that's kind of taken over that role a little bit. It reminds me more of McKinnon than any of the other running backs they have right now.
Yeah, he special teams primarily for his first couple of years, but even going back to 2018, like he was still ripping off like 6 yards a carry, but he wasn't getting a ton of volume, and it was like, why not give this guy more work? He's unstoppable when he gets to the edge, and then we really saw that kind of come to fruition this year, especially in the NFC Championship game, of course, when he had 4 touchdowns against the Packers. So yeah, I think Mostert for me, if I'm looking at those 6 guys, it's Raheem Mostert, Tevin Coleman, Matt Breida, who signed his 1-year restricted free agent tender on Thursday, a week before the draft. Jerick McKinnon, and then Jeff Wilson Jr. I think Mostert is the only guy there who I know for sure will be on the roster in 2020.
All right, interesting.
Everybody else I think is expected.
Okay. And finally, the kicking game. The team went out and drafted a punter last year. Mm-hmm. And Gould, been around a long time, had a little bit of an injury situation last year. His deep effectiveness not so good. Are the Niners? You think they might contemplate a late round kicker or a priority free agent kicker?
Man, maybe they signed Gold to a long-term deal last year, a 2-year deal effectively that paid him pretty handsomely. So I think he's going to be
Locked
their
in?
kicker at least going into this year. Yeah, I think so. They might sign a kicker as a priority free agent just to kind of just give Gold some competition, just as a safety net because you have 90 roster spots. Why not? But Gold last year really struggled. I know this is so like deep, but the Niners went through like 4 different long snappers last year because their long snapper Kyle Nelson had been suspended the previous year.
Okay.
As soon as Nelson came back, the only kick Gold missed for the final, I think it was 9 games. Yeah, I think it was the final 9 or 10 games. He missed one kick it was like a 54-yarder in the rain and the wind in Baltimore.
Okay.
But after the normal long snapper came back, he was money. So that's something that I think was a little bit of an overblown concern last year, just because of how much he struggled earlier in the year. But yeah, I think Gold's the guy.
Yeah, so probably then in the time off was probably at his age, maybe even more concerning because you never know.
Yeah.
I mean, you look at somebody like Vinatieri, and he starts having he has one season where he's banged up a little, and now all of a sudden he might retire. You just never know when it's going to happen.
Yeah.
But this is why I love having someone like you on that knows what is happening with the team, because I wouldn't have gotten that perspective otherwise, and that's the underlying information that you need to know, because people don't consider, what is a long snapper? Who cares? What does that have to do with anything? Well, it means a lot.
Yeah, no doubt. There's so much, and this wound up being a thing because Gold last year was automatic his first 2 years in San Francisco, and then last year just couldn't make a kick at the beginning of the year. And there was talk that the timing between when he goes to kick and when the snap was getting to the holder and when it was getting down was off. And maybe it was his long holdout last year that wound up messing him up, and it just happened to coincide with the return of the normal long snapper that he finally got his rhythm. But there was a definite correlation between his success and when the long snapper came back.
By the way, do they go after a kicker? I mean, excuse me, a tight end, so they add some depth?
Yeah, I think so. Trey Burton getting released by the Bears is interesting because I know the Niners pursued him a couple years ago when he was a free agent.
Okay.
He'll be a lot cheaper now, and I think that might be something that the 49ers certainly look into.
Okay.
This year's draft class is interesting because there's not like one dominant tight end that really stands out as like a first round guy. Hunter Bryant from UW is interesting. Chase Claypool, I know he's a wide receiver, but I think in an offense like San Francisco's, he could play like a move tight end wide receiver hybrid. There's a few guys that I've looked at, but honestly I haven't dove super deep into the tight end class yet, but I do think that they wind up taking one at some point.
Okay, last question then is, we'll go right at it. Picks 13-31. If San Francisco stays there and they don't trade out of it, your best guess on either A, position, or B, a player or two. Go ahead and give me some names, or give me the positions you definitely would, your best guess they're going to go after.
So I think if Javon Kinlaw falls to 13, I think they definitely look at him, the defensive lineman from South Carolina, just as I think his ceiling is DeForest Buckner-esque. Maybe he doesn't get there right away, but I think that's something they'll definitely look into. Trevon Diggs, the cornerback from Alabama, is somebody that I find very intriguing.
That would be at 31.
No, at 13.
Really, as high as 13.
If they trade back from 13,
okay.
I think he's a guy that they might like a lot. And Henry Ruggs, of the 3 receivers, I think Jerry Jeudy is at the top of the list for the Niners, but I don't envision him being available at 13. I think Ruggs will be, and I think Ruggs is probably the top receiver they really like. At 31, maybe somebody like Ross Blacklock from TCU, the defensive tackle, if they don't go with that spot earlier in the draft. somebody like maybe Jalen Johnson, the cornerback from Utah. I think they might go offense with that first pick and then defense with their second pick, whenever that is. But ultimately, the way their needs shake out, I really think that they can afford to just take the best football player that's on the board for them when they do pick, because they don't have one very specific glaring need that stands out above the rest.
All right, Kyle. So at Kyle A. Madsen, that's where we can find you on Twitter. And of course, the Niners Wire at usatoday.com. And hopefully, we'll be able to talk to you after the draft, Kyle, sometime between when the draft ends and whenever they decide to at least give us an indication of when training camp's going to begin, so we can, feel like we can actually get started in September, if that's at all possible.
Yeah, I've got my fingers crossed. If for no other reason, it means that means we've got this COVID-19 virus under control and people are getting back to normal and staying healthy. So,
absolutely.
That's the ultimate silver lining if there's football in September.
Thanks, Kyle. Talk to you next time.
Awesome. Thanks.